When it comes to successfully growing houseplants, the type of soil you use can greatly impact the room for error you have in growing that houseplant. My name is Tanner the Planter, and this is the truth about houseplants. Now the final soil that we are covering today is our Aroid soil. Aroid soil is usually very chunky. It accounts for a lot of air going in and around the roots, and there are several reasons why. Let's get into it here. Now just like in other videos, we're going to go over the anatomy, and I'm going to show you why this type of soil, a chunky soil, is appropriate for your Aroids. Right here I have a philodendron silver sword, and we're going to go through the leaves, the stems, and finally the roots to determine what type of soil ingredients we add to our pot. Now what we're looking for here is water storage. What part of the plants naturally store water? What plants of the part? What parts of the plant naturally store water and help it survive the little periods of drought? Now the first part of anatomy we're going to look at are the leaves. When we come in close on the leaves, what you'll notice is they're very bendy, they're very pliable. I can in fact bend them in half and they spring right back into it. That tells me that there's not really any water storage going on. If a leaf did have water storage, you wouldn't be able to bend it so much. Think about your succulents, your snake plants, your cacti. Those leaves don't really bend, they don't really fold. If you did fold them, they would break. And that's kind of showing you that they have water storage in their leaves. Those are succulents. So we're 0 for 1 on water storage when it comes to the philodendron here. Next up, we're going to look at the stems. Now if we come in close again, we can see that these stems are actually very thick. In some areas, they're even as thick as like one of my fingers. And as this plant matures and gets larger, those stems are actually going to get more and more thick. In a very mature specimen, you might even see them get as thick as your wrist. They can get very, very thick and robust as they support more weight while they're climbing up a tree, which this moss ball right here is mimicking. Now I would count this stem as a point of water storage. It's not water storage in the terms of like a succulent or a cactus, for example, but because it's so thick, because there is so much plant material in there, there's a lot of cells storing water. So this is a water storage check. So that means we have 1 point of no water storage in the leaves and 1 part of water storage in the stems. And finally, we will look at the roots to see if this plant has another point of water storage. Now, as we pull it out of the pot, you can see, it's very pot bound already, but the roots are quite thin. They're almost quite fibrous. There's not a lot of substance to them, especially when we compare them to the diameter or the thickness of the stems that we have going on up here. So this would also not be a point of water storage. Okay, now we're gonna mix up our own soils, and I'm gonna show you the reason for each one of our ingredients. So you'll remember we started out with our leaf. The leaf didn't have any natural water storage. So we're going to balance that out with 1 part peat moss. Peat moss is an ingredient that's widely used in the gardening industry that helps the soil retain more moisture. So we're gonna add that into our little concoction right here, our little dinner plate that we have going on. And next up, we checked the stems, and you'll remember the stems did have water storage. They're very thick and robust. They've got a little bit of water storage going on in there. So we're going to use a very chunky ingredient that's going to provide more airflow, more drainage. We are going to be counterbalancing that water storage that we have in these stems with a very chunky, airy mixture. And in this case, we are using cocoa chips. You can also use orchid bark or something like that. We really want a woody product that's going to, again, provide a lot of chunkiness, a lot of air down to the roots, and these two products do that really, really well. Okay, and finally we had the roots. Now you'll remember with the roots, they weren't quite thick and chunky like an anthurium root or a spider plant root or an orchid root, but they weren't quite as spindly or fibrous as a fern root. They were somewhere in between. So I'm going to be using perlite for my third ingredient. And this is a finer perlite because it's somewhere in between the two. It's not quite as moisture retentive as the peat moss, but it's not quite as chunky or airy as the orchid bark. Let's add that into our little concoction right here. We've got a nice mixture. So I like to use worm castings in my soil ingredients. This is really going to add back in some life, some nutrients to the soil, just to kind of give it some better health. So don't need much in there. Just a few tablespoons is going to be perfectly fine. Now all you have to do is mix it up. What you're left with is a very well-balanced, nice, moisture-retentive mixture that's also going to provide a lot of airflow to your roots. It should look something like this. Let's get it into a pot and see just how quickly it drains. This is going to be a good measurement for you making yours at home to see if it matches up with what we've got going on right here. Just a nice little extra double check. I know it helps me, hopefully it helps you. Gotta go get some water. All right, so your Aroid mixture should be quite chunky. It should drain quite quickly. This is really going to give you more room for error when it comes to taking care of your Aroids at home. So here we go. Let's see how fast it drains. Almost immediately, you can see it start coming out through the bottom drainage holes. This is going to be fantastic. Remember, you can always water your plants more frequently, but once you water a plant, it's really hard to take the water out of the soil. So a lot of people will say, Tanner, that drains way too fast. But in my opinion, it's always better to have your plant drain faster and add more water as the plant needs, rather than use a very moisture retentive soil and try to take moisture out if you water it too frequently. This is going to get a lot of airflow down into the roots, which again, the health of the roots is the health of your plant. So by adding a lot of air down into your roots, you're going to be increasing your room for error, which is always a good thing. So I hope this helps clarify how we make our Aroid soil and a little bit behind of why. Of course, part of the fun of the hobby is making some of your own soils. Some people enjoy it, some people don't enjoy it. Whatever you have to do to protect the joy of it all, do whatever you need. Now you know how to make your own, but if you don't want to make your own, remember we do have our Aroid soil over here. Aroid's Dream Come True is our soil that we have available on our website right now. We can ship it out to you. When you use our soils, don't forget to slap that pot and slap that subscribe button. Now what we're looking for here is water storage. Which parts? In a very mature specimen, when you use our soils, don't remember.